Amara Jenkins stands frozen in the master bedroom doorway of the Harrington estate, staring at the open jewelry box on the vanity. The priceless Cartier diamond necklace is gone. Behind her, Victoria Ashford's voice cuts through the silence, calling security. Amara's hands tremble as she realizes the truth too late. 8-year-old Lily Harrington sits silently in the corner, her wide eyes fixed on the scene, watching everything. This moment will haunt Amara for the next 72 hours. But Lily remembers what really happened 3 minutes ago. 15 minutes earlier, the morning had started like any other day at the sprawling Connecticut estate. Amara arrived at 6:30 in the morning, her worn Toyota pulling through the service entrance as the sun barely touched the horizon. She greeted Miguel, the groundskeeper, with her usual warm smile, asking about his daughter's upcoming quinceañera. The estate felt peaceful in these early hours, before the weight of the day settled into its marble halls and perfectly manicured gardens. Amara had worked at the Harrington estate for 2 years now, ever since she responded to a job posting that seemed almost too good to be true. The pay was generous, the hours reasonable, and most importantly, she had fallen in love with caring for Lily, the quiet 8-year-old girl who hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years. The child's mother had died in a terrible car accident when Lily was just 5, and the trauma had stolen her voice. Richard Harrington, the billionaire tech mogul who owned the estate, had tried everything from specialists to therapists, but Lily remained locked in silence. Amara connected with the girl in ways the expensive doctors couldn't, sitting with her for hours, reading stories, drawing pictures, never demanding words but always offering presence. She understood trauma in ways that came from her own life, growing up in Atlanta's rough neighborhoods, watching her own mother work 3 jobs to keep them housed and fed. That morning, Amara made her way through the kitchen where the chef was already preparing breakfast. She grabbed a cup of coffee and headed upstairs to check on Lily before beginning her cleaning duties. But Victoria Ashford intercepted her on the landing, her perfectly manicured hand gripping Amara's arm with surprising force. Victoria was Richard's fiancée, a stunning blonde woman in her early 30s who had swept into their lives 6 months ago at a charity gala. She wore designer clothes that cost more than Amara's annual salary and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. From the beginning, Victoria had made Amara uncomfortable. The comments started small, little jokes about Amara's hair, her clothes, her accent. "Oh, you speak so well," Victoria would say with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Where did you learn English?" When Amara explained she was born in Atlanta, Victoria would laugh it off as a misunderstanding. But the comments continued, each one a small cut disguised as friendly conversation. "I need you to clean the master bedroom immediately," Victoria said that morning, her voice tight with barely concealed anxiety. "Richard is returning from his business trip earlier than expected, and I need everything perfect." Amara noticed the unusual nervousness in Victoria's demeanor, the way her eyes darted around, the forced brightness of her smile. Something felt wrong, but Amara nodded and headed toward the master suite. As she entered the spacious bedroom with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Long Island Sound, she spotted Lily sitting in the window seat, her small body curled up with a notebook in her lap. The child was drawing, her pencil moving across the paper with focused intensity. "Good morning, sweetheart," Amara said softly, setting down her cleaning supplies. "What are you drawing today?" Lily didn't respond, but she glanced up briefly, her dark eyes meeting Amara's before returning to her artwork. Amara began her cleaning routine, dusting the antique furniture, straightening the silk curtains, speaking quietly to Lily about her plans for the day. She mentioned taking her younger brother Dante to visit colleges next month, how proud she was that he'd gotten a scholarship to study engineering. She talked about her mother's garden in Atlanta, how the tomatoes were coming in beautifully this year. These one-sided conversations had become their ritual, and Amara believed Lily understood and appreciated every word, even if she couldn't respond. Then Victoria burst through the door without knocking, her phone already held up and recording. "What are you doing touching my jewelry box?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusing. Amara stepped back, confused and startled. "I haven't touched anything, Miss Ashford. I was just dusting the dresser." But Victoria was already moving forward, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. She opened the ornate jewelry box on the vanity with dramatic flourish, her gasp perfectly timed. "The necklace," she cried out. "Richard's wedding gift to me. The $150,000 Cartier diamond necklace. It's gone." Amara felt her heart drop into her stomach. "Miss Ashford, I don't know anything about this. I just arrived and started cleaning." But Victoria was already calling security, her voice rising in pitch. "Marcus, get up here immediately. We have a situation." Within seconds, Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway. He was the head of security, a former police officer in his 50s with a military bearing and cold eyes that had never looked at Amara with anything but suspicion. Behind him came two other security personnel, their presence filling the room with tension. "This woman has stolen my necklace," Victoria declared, pointing at Amara with a trembling finger. "I want her bag searched immediately." Amara protested, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "I haven't taken anything. You can search my things. I have nothing to hide." Marcus approached her, with his hand outstretched. "Your bag, please." Amara handed over her worn leather purse, the one her mother had given her for her birthday 3 years ago. She watched as Marcus dumped its contents onto the bed: her wallet, her phone, her lip balm, a worn copy of Maya Angelou's poems, a granola bar. Then something else tumbled out. A small piece of paper that Marcus picked up with latex-gloved hands. He examined it, his expression hardening. Well, he said slowly. "A receipt from Diamond Exchange Pawn Shop in Bridgeport, dated yesterday at 3:15 in the afternoon. Description matches a Cartier diamond necklace." The room tilted. Amara stared at the receipt in disbelief. "That's not mine. I've never been to that pawn shop. I was working here yesterday afternoon. You can check the security logs." But she could see from their faces that the evidence had already condemned her. Victoria's expression of wounded betrayal was perfect, practiced, and utterly convincing. Lily remained motionless in the window seat, watching everything with those enormous eyes, her notebook forgotten in her lap. Marcus Webb escorted Amara to a small office on the ground floor, his grip on her arm firmer than necessary. He closed the door with a decisive click and gestured for her to sit in the hard wooden chair across from his desk. The room was sparse and cold, with security monitors lining one wall showing feeds from cameras positioned throughout the estate. Amara sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. She had done nothing wrong, yet the weight of accusation pressed down on her like a physical force. Marcus settled into his chair, leaning back with the casual authority of someone who had conducted countless interrogations. "Let's make this easy," he began, his voice deceptively calm. "Just tell me what you did with the necklace, and we can work something out before this gets worse." Amara met his gaze steadily. "I didn't take any necklace, Mr. Webb. I don't know how that receipt got in my bag, but it wasn't me." Marcus sighed, as if dealing with a difficult child. "Listen, I've been doing this job for 20 years. Before that, I spent 15 years with the Greenwich Police Department. I know how these things go. People like you see all this wealth around you every day, and eventually, temptation gets the better of you. It's natural, really. You work hard, send money back to your family, and you start thinking maybe you deserve a little piece of the good life." The phrase "people like you" hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Amara's stomach turn. "I'm not a thief," she said firmly. "I've worked here for 2 years without any problems. Check my record. Ask anyone who knows me." Marcus pulled out a notepad, making a show of reviewing his notes. "Your financial situation, let's talk about that. You send how much money to your mother in Atlanta each month?" Amara hesitated, sensing the trap but seeing no way around it. "About $500. She has medical bills. And you work 2 jobs, is that right?" "Here, and at the coffee shop in Stamford." "Yes, 4 nights a week at the coffee shop. I'm also taking online classes to finish my degree." Marcus nodded slowly, writing everything down. "So you're stretched pretty thin financially. Student loans too, I imagine." "Yes, but I'm managing. I've never missed a payment on anything." "Managing," Marcus repeated, his tone suggesting he didn't believe her. "That's what everyone says right before they do something desperate." Before Amara could respond, the door opened and Victoria swept in, her face streaked with tears that Amara noticed didn't actually make her eyes red or her nose run. It was a performance, perfectly calibrated for maximum impact. I'm sorry, Victoria said, her voice breaking beautifully. I just need to understand. Amara, I trusted you. Richard trusted you with Lily. How could you do this to us? Amara stood up, her frustration finally breaking through her careful composure. Miss Ashford, I didn't do anything. Someone planted that receipt in my bag. Please, you have to believe me. Victoria pressed a hand to her heart, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. I wanted to believe in you. I really did. I told Richard we should give you a chance when the agency sent your file. They mentioned you came from a challenging background, but I said everyone deserves an opportunity. And this is how you repay that kindness. The implication was clear and cruel. Victoria was painting herself as the generous white woman who had given a poor black girl a chance, only to be betrayed. It was a narrative as old as slavery itself, and Amara recognized its power even as she felt helpless to counter it. Marcus interjected, his voice harder now. Miss Ashford, let me handle this. Amara, we've also been talking to the other staff members. Some of them have mentioned concerning behavior. What behavior? Amara demanded. I've never done anything inappropriate. Marcus flipped through his notes. Rosa, one of the housekeepers, says you've been asking questions about the family's valuables. Where things are kept, how much they're worth. Amara felt the walls closing in. That's not true. I've never asked anything like that. But even as she said it, she remembered casual conversations in the kitchen, someone mentioning the expensive art collection, another person joking about the cost of Victoria's engagement ring. Had those innocent exchanges been twisted into evidence against her? Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The worst part is thinking about Lily. That poor child has been through so much. And now this. She was so attached to you, Amara. Richard is going to be devastated when he finds out. Where is Lily? Amara asked suddenly. She was in the room. She saw what happened. Marcus and Victoria exchanged a glance. The child is traumatized, Victoria said quickly. We've taken her to her room. She doesn't need to be involved in this ugliness. But she could tell you I didn't take anything. Amara insisted. She was right there the whole time. Lily doesn't speak, Marcus said flatly. In case you've forgotten. And even if she did, we're not going to put an 8-year-old through the trauma of an interrogation. The door opened again, and Amara's heart sank as Richard Harrington walked in. He was a tall man in his early 40s, with the kind of presence that came from years of commanding boardrooms and closing billion-dollar deals. She had always liked Richard, found him to be fair and genuinely caring about his staff. He asked about their families, remembered birthdays, and paid well above market rate. But the man who stood before her now looked like a stranger. His face was set in hard lines, his blue eyes cold and distant. Victoria immediately went to him, fitting herself against his side in a gesture that seemed both intimate and possessive. Richard, thank God you're here, she murmured. Richard looked at Amara, and she saw the disappointment and anger in his expression. I trusted you, he said, his voice low and controlled. I brought you into my home. I let you care for my daughter, and this is how you repay that trust. Amara felt tears burning in her eyes but refused to let them fall. Mr. Harrington, please listen to me. I didn't steal anything. Someone is setting me up. But Richard was already shaking his head. The evidence is pretty damning, Amara. The receipt in your bag, the timing, the motive. Marcus tells me you've been having financial difficulties. Everyone has financial difficulties. The Greenwich Police Department arrived within 30 minutes. 2 officers in crisp uniforms stepping out of their patrol car with the casual authority of people who rarely dealt with serious crime in this wealthy enclave. Officer Thomas Daniels was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and the thick build of someone who spent more time behind a desk than in the field. His partner, Officer Jennifer Chen, was younger, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Victoria met them at the door, her performance of distress now refined to perfection. She led them to the master bedroom, where she had staged the scene carefully. The jewelry box stood open on the vanity, other expensive pieces glittering inside to emphasize the absence of the diamond necklace. She handed them a printed photograph of herself wearing the necklace at a charity gala, the diamonds catching the camera flash magnificently. It was a gift from Richard, she explained, her voice trembling, for our engagement. He had it custom made. $150,000. Officer Daniels whistled low. That's grand larceny, he said, making notes in a small pad. Felony charges. Victoria nodded, wringing her hands. I never thought she would do something like this. We trusted her with everything. With Lily. She went on to explain how she had noticed Amara acting strangely that morning, how she had suspected something was wrong and decided to check on her jewelry. Officer Chen spoke up, her voice more measured than her partner's. When did you last see the necklace? Last night. Victoria answered without hesitation. I wore it to dinner with friends. When I came home, I put it back in the box, right where it always goes. I'm very careful about these things. Officer Daniels asked to see the pawn shop receipt, which Marcus had sealed in an evidence bag. He examined it closely, then pulled out his radio. Let me call this in, verify it's legitimate. While they waited, Victoria continued building her narrative. She mentioned how generous she and Richard had been with Amara, how they had overlooked her rough background because they believed in second chances. Each word was carefully chosen to plant seeds of suspicion, painting Amara as someone from a world where such theft might be commonplace. Officer Chen walked around the bedroom, her gaze lingering on details. She paused at the window seat where Lily had been sitting earlier. Was anyone else in the room this morning? She asked. Just Lily, Victoria said quickly. Richard's daughter, but she doesn't speak. She hasn't since her mother died 3 years ago. Where is she now? In her room with her nanny. I didn't want her traumatized by all this. Officer Daniels returned, his expression grim. The pawn shop confirms the receipt is real. Transaction recorded yesterday at 3:15 in the afternoon. Description matches a Cartier diamond necklace. They're sending over security footage from their cameras. Victoria's face lit up with vindication. You see? I told you. She took it yesterday and tried to sell it immediately. Downstairs in the security office, Amara sat with her hands clenched together, trying to control her racing heart. She could hear voices, footsteps, the sounds of her life falling apart. When the officers finally came to speak with her, she stood up, determined to maintain her dignity. Officer Daniels read her rights in a flat monotone, the familiar words from 1,000 television shows suddenly terrifyingly real. Do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you? Yes, Amara managed, but I didn't do anything wrong. Then how do you explain the receipt in your bag? Daniels demanded, his patience clearly thin. Amara took a deep breath. Someone put it there. I've never been to that pawn shop. Yesterday afternoon at 3:15, I was here working. Check the security logs. They track when staff members clock in and out. Marcus, standing nearby, pulled up the digital logs on his computer. He frowned. According to this, she clocked out at 2:30 and didn't clock back in until 4:45. Amara's mind reeled. That's not possible. I was here all afternoon. I took my lunch break at noon and worked straight through until my shift ended at 5. Check the cameras. But as they pulled up the security footage, gaps appeared. The cameras in the staff areas showed her leaving through the service entrance at 2:30, then returning at 4:45. The timestamps were clear, the footage seemingly unimpeachable. That's not me, Amara insisted, staring at the screen in horror. Or if it is, someone altered the footage. I never left the estate. Officer Daniels exchanged a look with his partner that Amara recognized. It was the look of law enforcement officers who had already decided someone was guilty and were just going through the motions of an investigation. Officer Chen seemed slightly more sympathetic but didn't contradict her partner. We need to take you to the station, Daniels said. You can call a lawyer from there. As they led her toward the front door, Amara caught sight of Richard standing in the hallway with Victoria. She tried one more time. Mr. Harrington, please. Think about Lily. You know me. You know I would never hurt her or your family. Someone is doing this to me. But Richard's face remained cold. Save it for your lawyer, he said, turning away. Victoria stood beside him, and for just a moment, Amara saw the woman's true expression. The mask of distress had slipped, revealing something cruel and calculating underneath. Victoria gave her a small, triumphant smile before schooling her features back into wounded innocence. As the officers walked Amara to their patrol car, she saw other staff members watching from windows and doorways. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental. Rosa, the housekeeper who had allegedly made statements against her, stood near the kitchen entrance, her face troubled but saying nothing. Miguel, the groundskeeper, met Amara's eyes and gave her a small nod, but he too remained silent. The power dynamics of the estate were clear. Nobody would risk their job to defend her. At the police station, Amara was processed through a system that felt designed to strip away humanity. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings catalogued and sealed in plastic bags. They put her in a holding cell while they waited for her arraignment. The public defender assigned to her case finally arrived 3 hours later. James Mitchell was a black man in his late 30s, with tired eyes and a briefcase that had seen better days. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and a honesty that Amara appreciated, even as it terrified her. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said, spreading out the police report on the metal table between them. "This looks bad. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. The receipt, the security footage showing you leaving the estate during the time of the pawnshop transaction. The financial motive." "I didn't do it," Amara said firmly. "I know Victoria Ashford planted that evidence. I just don't know how she manipulated the security footage." James made notes, his pen scratching across yellow legal paper. "Do you have any proof of that? Any evidence that Miss Ashford has it out for you?" Amara thought about the subtle racist comments, the microaggressions, the way Victoria looked at her when she thought no one was watching. But how do you prove a feeling? How do you document the 1,000 small cuts that had made her increasingly uncomfortable over the past 6 months? "She's made comments," Amara said slowly, "about my race, my background. Nothing overt enough that I felt comfortable reporting it to Mr. Harrington. But there's been a pattern." James nodded, still writing. "We can try to establish bias, but it's going to be difficult without concrete evidence. Rich white woman accusing black domestic worker of theft is not going to play well. But we need more than just your word against hers." The arraignment was scheduled for the next morning. James explained the process, the likely bail amount, the timeline for trial if it went that far. "One more thing," he said, his voice gentle. "The judge you're seeing tomorrow, Judge Patricia Morrison, she's known for being tough on property crimes, sees them as violations of trust. I'm going to argue for reasonable bail, but you should be prepared for it to be substantial." The bail hearing the next morning confirmed James Mitchell's warnings. Judge Patricia Morrison was a severe woman in her 60s. Her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed Amara's case file. The courtroom was nearly empty, except for a few court staff and a reporter from the local paper, who looked bored until the prosecutor mentioned the dollar amount of the stolen necklace. The prosecutor, an assistant district attorney named Bradley Winters, presented the case against Amara with efficient brutality. He emphasized the breach of trust, the vulnerability of the family who had employed her, and the substantial value of the stolen property. "Your Honor, the defendant had access to the victim's most intimate spaces, was trusted with the care of a vulnerable child, and exploited that trust to commit grand larceny. We believe she represents a flight risk given the severity of the charges and the potential sentence she faces." James stood and argued for reasonable bail, pointing out Amara's clean record, her ties to the community, her stable employment history. But Judge Morrison interrupted him. "Stable employment," she said sharply. "She was employed by the victim until she stole from them. That's not what I would call stable." The judge set bail at $50,000. In the gallery, Amara heard someone gasp. It might have been her own voice. To get out, she would need to pay a bail bondsman 10%, $5,000, money she absolutely did not have. "Your Honor," James tried again. "My client works 2 jobs to support herself and help her family. She cannot afford that amount." Judge Morrison looked at Amara over her glasses, her expression suggesting she had seen hundreds of defendants make similar claims. Then perhaps she should have considered the financial implications before committing grand larceny. Bail is set at $50,000. Next case. As bailiffs led Amara out of the courtroom, she caught sight of Victoria sitting in the back row, dressed in elegant black, as if attending a funeral. The woman met Amara's eyes and smiled, a small secret expression of victory that no one else could see. At county jail, Amara was assigned to a cell with 3 other women. The space was cramped and gray, the air heavy with the smell of industrial cleaner and despair. Her cellmates were all women of color, a fact that did not escape Amara's notice. There was Keisha, a young black woman in for drug possession, her second offense. Maria, a Latina woman who had violated probation by missing a meeting with her parole officer because she was in the hospital having a baby. And Tanya, an older black woman who had been caught shoplifting groceries to feed her grandchildren. Each of them had a story of systemic failure, of poverty and circumstances, and a justice system that criminalized survival. Over the next 3 days, Amara learned more about the machinery of mass incarceration than she had ever wanted to know. She learned that the public defender's office was so overwhelmed that James Mitchell was juggling over 200 cases simultaneously. She learned that wealthy defendants rarely spent time in county jail because they could afford bail. She learned that the guards viewed the inmates with barely disguised contempt, and that women of color received the harshest treatment. Officer Patricia Mills was particularly cruel. She was a white woman in her 50s who seemed to take personal pleasure in making the inmates feel worthless. She addressed them with racial slurs thinly disguised as prison slang. She deliberately gave them spoiled food, claiming it was all they had. When Amara politely asked for a vegetarian meal option for religious reasons, Officer Mills laughed. "This ain't the Ritz, sweetheart. You eat what we give you or you don't eat at all. Should have thought about that before you started stealing from good people." At night, lying on the thin mattress that smelled of 1,000 previous occupants, Amara called her mother on the jail's payphone system, which charged $5 for a 15-minute call. Her mother's voice broke when she answered, "Baby, I'm so sorry. I've been trying to get the money together for bail, but I don't have anything close to $5,000. "I know, Mama," Amara said, fighting back tears. "It's okay. I'm going to be okay." But they both knew she was lying. Her mother tried to be strong. "Your brother wants to drop out of school. Come home and get a job to help." I told him absolutely not. You didn't work this hard to get him into college just to have him throw it away. The mention of Dante broke something in Amara. He was 19. Brilliant. The first person in their family to go to college. He wanted to be an engineer, to build bridges and buildings, to create things that would last. "Don't let him do that," Amara said urgently. "Promise me, Mama. This is not his burden to carry." After the call, she returned to her cell to find James Mitchell waiting. He looked even more exhausted than before. His tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled. The news he brought was devastating. "Victoria Ashford has provided additional evidence to the prosecutor," he said, laying out photographs and documents on the small table in the visitors' area. "Security footage from the estate showing you entering the master bedroom alone the day before the necklace went missing. She claims you must have been casing the room, planning the theft." Amara stared at the image. It was her, unmistakably, but taken out of context. "I clean that room every day," she protested. "Of course I was in there. That's my job." James held up a hand. "I know, but they're building a narrative. There's more. A jeweler in Stamford has come forward claiming that a woman matching your description came into his shop 2 weeks ago, asking about selling high-end jewelry. Has provided a statement." "That's a lie," Amara said flatly. "I've never been to a jewelry store in Stamford. And here's the worst part," James continued, pulling out printed screenshots of text messages. "These are from Victoria Ashford's phone. Text messages she claims she received from you asking about the necklace, its value, where it was kept. They're dated over the past month." Amara felt like she was drowning. "Those texts are fake. I never sent them. Check my phone records." "We will," James assured her. "But forging text messages is harder to prove than you'd think. They have the messages on Victoria's phone, complete with your contact information." He sat back, rubbing his eyes. "Amara, I have to be honest with you. The prosecutor is offering a plea deal. If you plead guilty to attempted grand larceny, they'll recommend 2 years with the possibility of early parole for good behavior. If we go to trial and lose, you're looking at 10 to 15 years. Amara shook her head violently. "No. I won't admit to something I didn't do. I won't let them make me a criminal." Jameis' expression was sympathetic but grim. "I understand your position, but juries in Greenwich are predominantly white and wealthy. They're going to see a wealthy white woman as the victim and you as the help who got greedy. That's just the reality of the system we're working in." "So I'm guilty because I'm black and poor?" Amara demanded, her voice rising. That's what you're telling me. I'm telling you the odds, James said quietly. I'm telling you what I've seen happen in hundreds of cases just like yours. The system is not designed to give you a fair shot. I will fight for you if you want to go to trial. I will do everything in my power to defend you. But you need to understand what you're up against. Back in her cell that night, Amara lay awake staring at the ceiling. Keisha, her cellmate, spoke softly from the bunk above. You didn't do it, did you? No, Amara whispered. But nobody believes me. Yeah, Keisha said. That's how it goes. System don't care about the truth. It cares about what it can prove. And rich white folks can prove anything they want. Meanwhile, at the Harrington estate, Elena Rodriguez, the head housekeeper who had worked there for 15 years, was beginning to notice things. She had defended Amara when Marcus questioned the staff, insisting that the young woman was honest and hardworking. But Victoria had shut her down quickly, reminding her that her opinion was neither requested nor relevant. Now Elena watched as Victoria moved through the house with a new confidence, as if she had won some invisible battle. She noticed how Victoria controlled Richard's access to information, intercepting calls and mail, always present when he spoke to his lawyers or business partners. Most troubling was what Elena observed with Lily. The child had always been quiet, but now she seemed to have retreated even further into herself. She barely ate, spent hours staring out windows, and clutched a notebook to her chest as if it contained precious secrets. One afternoon, while Victoria was out shopping, Elena brought Lily her lunch. The child sat in the window seat of her bedroom, the same spot where she had witnessed Amara's accusation. Elena noticed the notebook on Lily's lap, open to a page covered in careful drawings. The images made Elena's breath catch. They showed two women in what was clearly the master bedroom. One woman, drawn with yellow hair like Victoria, was putting something into a bag. The other woman, drawn with brown skin like Amara, was standing far away. The sequence of drawings told a story that contradicted everything Victoria had claimed. Lily. Honey, Elena said gently, did you draw what you saw that morning? Lily looked up at her with enormous eyes and nodded slowly. Can I see the whole notebook? Elena asked, her heart pounding. But before Lily could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the room. What's going on here? She had returned earlier than expected, and now stood in the doorway, her expression sharp with suspicion. Elena quickly stepped back. Just bringing Miss Lily her lunch. Ma'am. Victoria moved forward and snatched the notebook from Lily's lap. She flipped through the pages, her face going white and then red with anger. This is completely inappropriate, she hissed at Elena. You're fired. Effective immediately. Pack your things and get out, Elena protested. But Miss Ashford, I've worked here for 15 years. Mr. Harrington is not here, Victoria interrupted coldly. And when he returns, I will inform him of your insubordination and your attempts to manipulate his traumatized daughter. You have 1 hour to leave the property. Elena looked at Lily, who had gone completely still, her small body rigid with fear. The housekeeper wanted to fight, wanted to take the notebook to Richard, wanted to tell someone what she had seen. But she was also an immigrant from El Salvador, working on a visa that was tied to her employment. One call from Victoria to immigration authorities could destroy not just her job but her entire life in America. She had a daughter in college, a son in high school. She couldn't risk their future. Yes, ma'am, Elena said quietly, hating herself for the surrender. As she left the room, she saw Lily watching her with an expression of profound betrayal. Another adult had failed to protect her, had failed to speak her truth. Victoria waited until Elena was gone, then sat down next to Lily. Her voice was soft, almost loving, but her grip on the child's arm was tight enough to bruise. Sweetheart, we need to talk about these drawings. They're not real, are they? They're just from your imagination. Sometimes little girls make up stories, especially when they've been through trauma. Lily tried to pull away, but Victoria held firm. You need to be very careful about the stories you tell. Bad things happen to little girls who lie. Remember what I told you after your mommy died? Remember how accidents can happen to people we love. The threat was clear. Lily had stopped speaking 3 years ago, not just from the trauma of her mother's death but from something Victoria had said to her in the confusion afterward. Something about how more accidents could happen if Lily told certain truths. Now, Victoria was reminding her of that terror. "I'm going to keep this notebook safe," Victoria continued, tucking it under her arm. "And you're going to be a good girl and not make up any more stories. Understand?" Lily nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. News of Amara Jenkins' arrest spread through Stamford's black community like wildfire, carried by social media posts and urgent phone calls between family members and friends. By the end of the week, her mother had contacted their church in Atlanta, and Reverend Marcus Thompson, at Bethel AME in Stamford, had mobilized his congregation. The Sunday service was packed, with people standing along the walls, their faces reflecting a mix of righteous anger and weary recognition. They had seen this story before, lived variations of it themselves. A black woman accused, evidence against her mounting like a fortress built on sand, and the machinery of white wealth grinding her into dust. Reverend Thompson stood at the pulpit, his voice resonating through the sanctuary with the power of generations of black preachers who had fought injustice from behind wooden lecterns. "Sister Amara Jenkins is one of ours," he declared. "She came to this church every Sunday she wasn't working. She volunteered in our youth program. She sang in our choir, and now she sits in a jail cell, unable to make bail, accused of a crime that every bone in my body tells me she did not commit. We know this story. We have lived this story. But I'm here to tell you today that we are not going to let another sister be crushed by a system that was never designed to see her as innocent." The collection plate filled with everything people could spare. Elderly church members on fixed incomes contributed $20 bills. Young families brought their children's piggy banks. By the end of the service, they had raised $3,000. Not enough for Amara's bail, but a start. More importantly, they had galvanized a community. Jasmine Rivers, Amara's childhood friend from Atlanta who now worked as a paralegal in Hartford, drove to Stamford that afternoon. She and Amara had grown up together, shared dreams and secrets, and the burden of being young black girls in a world that tried to make them small. Jasmine had clawed her way through community college and paralegal certification while working full-time, and she brought that same fierce determination to Amara's case. She met with James Mitchell in his cramped office above a bodega, surrounded by towers of case files that seemed to lean inward like they might collapse at any moment. "I want to help," Jasmine announced. "I'm a paralegal. I can do research, interview witnesses, whatever you need, and I don't need to be paid." James looked at her with the cautious hope of someone who had learned not to expect miracles. "Can you dig into Victoria Ashford's background? Find out who she was before she showed up in Richard Harrington's life 6 months ago. Because something about this setup smells wrong." Jasmine spent the next week becoming an expert on Victoria Ashford. She searched public records, social media, employment histories. What she found was troubling in its gaps. Victoria's digital footprint began only 3 years ago, as if she had materialized, fully formed. Before that, nothing. No college records, no previous employment, no family connections. It was the profile of someone who had deliberately erased their past. Digging deeper, Jasmine found sealed court records in Nevada and a name change petition in California. Victoria Ashford had legally been Victoria Ashford for only 4 years. Before that, she was Bethany Wallace. And Bethany Wallace had a criminal history. Minor fraud charges, identity theft, a pattern of targeting wealthy older men. But the records were sealed, accessible only with court orders that would take weeks or months to obtain. Still, it was something. A crack in Victoria's perfect facade. Jasmine also tracked down 2 other wealthy families Victoria had worked for before the Harringtons. The Aldridges in Boston had employed her as a personal assistant for 8 months before she left suddenly. The Reynoldses in Philadelphia had hired her as an event coordinator for 6 months before she disappeared. In both cases, domestic staff members of color had been fired shortly before Victoria's departure. The Aldridges had let go a black butler, claiming theft of silver. The Reynoldses had fired a Latina nanny over allegations of child neglect. Neither case had resulted in criminal charges, but the pattern was unmistakable. However, when Jasmine contacted these families, they refused to speak with her. The Aldridges' lawyer sent a terse email stating his clients had signed a non-disclosure agreement and would not be commenting. The Reynoldses simply didn't respond to multiple inquiries. These were people insulated by wealth and legal protections, unwilling to involve themselves in anything messy or public. Meanwhile, the Connecticut Justice Coalition, a nonprofit focused on criminal justice reform, had initially shown interest in Amara's case. Their director, a white woman named Sarah Mitchell, met with Reverend Thompson and listened to the details with apparent sympathy. She talked about systemic racism, about the disparate treatment of black defendants, about the importance of standing up to injustice. But then she made some calls. She spoke with her board members, several of whom were wealthy donors with connections to Greenwich society. She received polite but firm pushback about taking on a case that would antagonize Richard Harrington, whose technology company had contracts with half the Fortune 500 firms, and whose philanthropy supported dozens of nonprofits. Within a week, Sarah called Reverend Thompson with her regrets. "We've decided this case doesn't quite fit our current priorities," she said, her voice apologetic but firm. "We're focusing more on legislative reform this year rather than individual cases." Reverend Thompson saw through the excuse immediately. In other words, Richard Harrington's money talks louder than our calls for justice. Sarah's silence confirmed his accusation. One by one, the institutional supports fell away. The ACLU passed on the case. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund was too stretched on other matters. A local activist group that had initially planned a protest outside the courthouse received threatening calls suggesting their tax-exempt status might be reviewed if they proceeded. Richard Harrington's influence extended far beyond his personal wealth. He sat on corporate boards, chaired charity organizations, and had the ear of state legislators and judges. His legal team, led by a powerhouse attorney named Margaret Chen, began a quiet campaign of intimidation. Anyone who looked too closely at the case received legal letters warning against defamation. The message was clear. Challenging Victoria's accusations meant going to war with one of the most powerful men in Connecticut, and no one was willing to risk that fight. Amara learned about these defeats during her daily calls with James and Jasmine. Each conversation brought more disappointment, more evidence of how completely Victoria had trapped her. She was living the reality that countless black women had faced before her. The word of a white woman backed by wealth and power would always outweigh her truth. In her cell, surrounded by other women caught in the same grinding machinery of mass incarceration, Amara began to lose hope. She stopped eating properly, dropping 15 pounds in 3 weeks. She stopped sleeping well, plagued by nightmares where she was sentenced to decades in prison, where she watched her mother die without being able to hold her hand, where Dante gave up his dreams and Lily grew up believing Amara had betrayed her. Keisha, her cellmate, tried to keep her spirits up. "My grandmother used to say the darkest hour is just before the dawn." I know that's some cliché stuff, but sometimes clichés are true. But Amara couldn't see any dawn coming. The trial date was set for 2 weeks away, and James had warned her that the evidence against her was overwhelming. The jury would be selected from Greenwich residents, people from a world so far removed from her own they might as well be from different planets. They would look at Victoria, with her designer clothes and her tears, and her status as the fiancée of a beloved billionaire, and they would see a victim. They would look at Amara, with her public defender and her 2 jobs and her need to send money home to Atlanta, and they would see exactly what they had been conditioned to see. Someone who didn't belong in that world, someone who had reached for something that wasn't hers. Then came the blow that nearly destroyed her completely. Amara's mother called, her voice so broken that at first Amara couldn't understand what she was saying. "Mama, slow down. What happened?" "I lost my job, baby. They let me go today." No reason given, just that they were downsizing. Amara's mother had worked at the same hospital in Atlanta for 20 years, first as a janitor and eventually working her way up to a supervisor position. The job was her pride, her security, her identity. "That doesn't make any sense," Amara said, though a terrible suspicion was already forming. "They can't just fire you for no reason. They can, and they did. And baby, I don't think it was random. Someone called my supervisor last week, asking questions about you, about our family, a woman with a fancy voice. Then this week, suddenly I'm being let go. Victoria. It had to be Victoria. The woman was systematically destroying not just Amara but everyone connected to her, demonstrating the reach of her power and her willingness to use it. The cruelty was breathtaking. That night, Jasmine visited Amara in jail, and they sat across from each other in the visiting room, separated by scratched plexiglass. Jasmine's eyes were red from crying. "I got a letter today," she said, holding up an envelope. Typed, "No return address." It says, "If I don't stop investigating Victoria Ashford, they'll report me to the Bar Association for unauthorized practice of law. Since I'm a paralegal working on legal matters outside my supervising attorney's knowledge, I could lose my license, Amara. I could lose everything I've worked for." "Then stop," Amara said immediately. "I won't let her destroy you too." But Jasmine shook her head fiercely. "No, I'm not stopping. I'm just telling you what we're up against. This woman has resources and connections I can barely comprehend. But that also means she's scared. People who are secure in their lies don't work this hard to silence everyone." She leaned closer to the glass. Something else happened. Reverend Thompson's church got audited by the IRS, just randomly, out of the blue. "They're claiming irregularities with the fundraiser we did for your bail. We both know that's nonsense. But the audit will tie up the church's accounts for months. It's another warning." Amara pressed her palms against the plexiglass, wishing she could reach through and hold her friend's hands. "I'm going to take the plea deal," she said quietly. "I can't keep watching everyone I love suffer for my sake." "Don't you dare," Jasmine said sharply. "Don't you dare let them make you plead guilty to something you didn't do. That's exactly what Victoria wants. She wants to break you, wants to make you another statistic, another black woman swallowed up by the system. You start down that road, you're not just giving up your freedom for 2 years. You're carrying that conviction for the rest of your life. Every job application, every background check, every moment when you have to check that box that says you're a convicted felon. Is that really what you want?" Amara didn't answer because they both knew it wasn't what she wanted. It was what she was being forced into, like an animal backed into a corner with no options left. The next morning, James Mitchell visited with the prosecution's final offer. "They want an answer by 5 o'clock tomorrow," he said. "Plead guilty, serve 2 years, or go to trial and risk 15. Those are your options." He paused, his expression troubled. "There's something else. I received an anonymous tip this morning. Someone sent me a photo of your brother leaving his college campus. There's a message on the back. Drop the case, or accidents happen. Amara. They're threatening Dante now." The room spun. Victoria wasn't just willing to destroy Amara's life. She was willing to hurt a 19-year-old kid who had nothing to do with any of this. "I need to talk to my mother," Amara whispered. That call was the hardest conversation of her life. Her mother listened to everything. The threats against Dante, the offer of the plea deal, the impossible choice between fighting for justice and protecting her family. When Amara finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Baby," her mother finally said, her voice heavy with the weight of generations, "I've lived long enough to know that sometimes there are no good choices. Sometimes you just have to choose which kind of pain you can live with. If you take that plea deal, you'll survive. You'll come home eventually. But if something happens to Dante because you kept fighting, neither one of us will survive that." Amara closed her eyes, feeling the last ember of hope extinguish. "Okay, Mama." That night, she told James to accept the plea deal. She would plead guilty to attempted grand larceny. She would serve 2 years in prison. She would carry the conviction for the rest of her life. Victoria Ashford would win, and there was nothing left to do but surrender. The plea hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a gray Tuesday morning. Amara, dressed in the orange jumpsuit of the county jail, her hands shackled in front of her, her spirit broken in ways that no chains could ever accomplish. James Mitchell met her outside the courtroom, his face etched with the exhaustion of a man who had fought too many losing battles. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one final time. "Once you enter that plea, there's no taking it back." Amara nodded, not trusting her voice. Inside the courtroom, she saw Victoria and Richard seated in the front row. Victoria looked elegant in a navy blue dress, her hair perfect, her expression appropriately solemn. Richard sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. But Amara noticed he looked tired, older than he had just weeks ago. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Judge Morrison took her seat and shuffled papers with the efficiency of someone who processed plea deals every day, each one just another file in an endless stream of human tragedy reduced to legal documents. In the matter of the state of Connecticut versus Amara Jenkins, the judge began. Amara stood, her legs trembling, James beside her for support. This was it. The moment when she would speak words that were lies, admit to crimes she didn't commit, and seal her fate for the next 2 years and the rest of her life after that. The judge began the required litany of questions. Miss Jenkins, do you understand the charges against you? Yes, Your Honor. Has anyone forced you or coerced you into accepting this plea agreement? Amara thought of the threats against Dante, the photo of her brother walking across campus, Victoria's campaign of terror against everyone she loved. No, Your Honor. Do you understand that by pleading guilty, you waive your right to a trial? She understood that in this system, she had never really had the right to a trial. She had the right to be ground up by a process designed to extract confessions, to avoid the expense and uncertainty of actually proving guilt. But she said, "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Morrison looked at her over her glasses. "Are you prepared to enter your plea?" Amara opened her mouth to speak the words that would destroy her future. And then something happened that no one in that courtroom expected. The double doors at the back burst open with a crash that echoed off the wooden walls. Everyone turned to see a small figure standing in the doorway, backlit by the fluorescent lights of the hallway. It was Lily Harrington. The 8-year-old girl stood there in a pink dress, her hair in neat braids, her small hands clenched at her sides. Beside her was Elena Rodriguez, the fired housekeeper, her face determined despite the fear in her eyes. "Stop," Lily said, her voice small but clear in the shocked silence of the courtroom. "Please stop." She didn't do it. The word she hung in the air like a miracle. Richard Harrington shot to his feet, his face a mask of shock and joy and confusion. "Lily? Baby, you're speaking." Lily walked down the center aisle, her steps steady despite her trembling. Elena followed close behind, ready to catch her if she faltered. Victoria had gone completely white, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "Lily, sweetie, you're confused," Victoria said, her voice strangled. "You've been through so much trauma. Let's get you home and—" "No," Lily said, louder now. She reached the front of the courtroom and turned to face the judge. "I need to tell the truth. I saw everything that morning. I was in the bedroom, in the window seat. Miss Amara didn't take the necklace. Miss Victoria did." The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged her gavel, calling for order. The prosecutor stood, objecting to this irregular interruption. James Mitchell grabbed Amara's arm, his eyes wide with sudden hope. Richard moved toward his daughter, but Lily held up a hand to stop him. "I need to say this, Daddy. I've been quiet for so long, but I can't be quiet anymore. Miss Victoria hurt Mommy. She made the car crash happen. And then she told me if I ever spoke about what I knew, she would hurt you too. She would make more accidents happen. So I stopped talking, because I was so scared." Victoria lunged forward, reaching for Lily. "You little liar. This is absurd. Your Honor, this child is clearly disturbed. She doesn't know what she's saying." But Richard caught Victoria's arm, and for the first time, Amara saw doubt and horror dawn in his eyes as he looked at his fiancée. Lily continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "That morning, Miss Amara came to clean the bedroom. I was in the window seat behind the curtain, where I always go. Miss Amara didn't know I was there. She started cleaning like she always does, talking to me even though she couldn't see me. Then Miss Victoria came in and told Miss Amara to go get fresh linens from the supply closet downstairs. When Miss Amara left, Miss Victoria took the necklace from the jewelry box and put it in Miss Amara's bag. Then she took the bag and did something else to it. When Miss Amara came back, Miss Victoria started yelling that the necklace was missing. She called security, and she recorded everything on her phone. It was all planned." Elena stepped forward, addressing the judge directly. "Your Honor, I know I'm not supposed to speak, but I have evidence. Lily showed me drawings months ago. She's been documenting everything she's seen. And there's more. Victoria fired me when she caught me looking at Lily's notebook, but not before I took photos on my phone. I was too scared to come forward before, but I can't watch an innocent woman go to prison." She held up her phone, showing images of Lily's careful drawings, each one depicting scenes from the morning of the accusation and other moments over the past months. The drawings told a story of a child who had witnessed everything but had been too terrified to speak. Judge Morrison called for a recess. The courtroom cleared except for essential personnel. The prosecutor, looking thunderstruck, requested time to investigate these new allegations. James Mitchell argued strenuously that all charges against Amara should be dropped immediately. While lawyers argued procedural points, Richard Harrington sat down next to his daughter in the gallery. He took her small hands in his and looked into her eyes with a mixture of wonder and grief. "Baby girl, is this true? Has Victoria been threatening you all this time?" Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She said she would hurt you like she hurt Mommy. She said accidents could happen to anyone. I was so scared, Daddy. But I couldn't let Miss Amara go to jail for something she didn't do. Miss Amara was always kind to me. She never made me feel bad for not talking. She just loved me." Richard pulled his daughter into his arms, and for the first time in 3 years, he heard her sob against his shoulder. Police officers moved to detain Victoria, who was now screaming and struggling. "This is insane! You're going to believe a disturbed child over me? I'm the victim here. That woman stole from me." But her mask had completely shattered, revealing the calculated cruelty underneath. Detective Sarah Morrison, who had been called to the courthouse as soon as Lily began speaking, took Victoria into custody. As they led her away, Victoria's final words were pure venom. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. It'll destroy all of you. Richard, you're going to regret this. That brat is lying. I should have finished what I started with her mother." The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Richard's face went gray. The detective made note of the statement, and suddenly, what had been a theft case transformed into something much darker. Within hours, a full investigation was launched. Richard's legal team, no longer protecting Victoria but seeking justice, provided access to everything. Security footage was reviewed by forensic experts who quickly discovered that the timestamps had been digitally altered. The footage showing Amara leaving the estate during the pawnshop transaction had been manipulated, spliced together from different days to create a false timeline. The real timestamps showed Amara exactly where she said she was, working inside the estate all afternoon. The pawnshop owner, faced with obstruction of justice charges, admitted he had been paid $5,000 to create a fake receipt and provide false testimony. The jeweler who claimed Amara had inquired about selling jewelry confessed to the same. Both had been contacted by Victoria and offered money to participate in framing an innocent woman. Forensic analysis of Victoria's phone revealed something even more damning. The text messages allegedly from Amara had been created using a spoofing app. Victoria had sent messages to herself, making it appear they came from Amara's number. Cell phone records proved Amara's phone had never sent any of those messages. But the most shocking discovery came when Richard's attorneys examined his first wife's accident. The car crash that killed Catherine Harrington 3 years ago had been ruled an accident. Her brakes had failed on a curved mountain road, sending her vehicle over an embankment. Investigators at the time found no evidence of foul play. Now, with Victoria's inadvertent confession ringing in their ears, they looked again. They found evidence that had been missed or ignored, marks on the brake lines consistent with deliberate tampering. They tracked Victoria's movements and discovered she had been in the area at the time under a different name, posing as a pharmaceutical sales representative. She had been stalking Richard and his family for months before Catherine's death, studying their routines, looking for an opportunity. They found journal entries on Victoria's computer, meticulously documenting her plan. She had chosen Richard specifically, researching wealthy widowers who might be vulnerable to a new relationship. She had studied his business, his habits, his weaknesses. Catherine's death hadn't been a tragic accident. It had been murder, carefully planned and executed. And Lily, who had been 5 years old at the time, had seen something, maybe not the actual crime, but something afterward, something Victoria had said or done that made the little girl suspicious. That was why Victoria had threatened her into silence. The child was a witness to her mother's murder. The judicial system, which had moved with ruthless efficiency to prosecute Amara Jenkins, now turned that same machinery toward Victoria Ashford with devastating force. Within hours of Lily's testimony, All charges against Amara were dropped. Judge Morrison, her face troubled by how close they had come to imprisoning an innocent woman, issued a formal apology from the bench. Miss Jenkins, our system failed you gravely. While I cannot undo the suffering you have endured, please know that justice will now be pursued with the full weight of the law. Amara stood in the courtroom, still in her orange jumpsuit, unable to fully process that she was free. James Mitchell gripped her shoulder, tears running down his face. Jasmine pushed through the gallery railing and pulled Amara into a fierce embrace. The Connecticut Justice Coalition, which had abandoned her case under pressure, now sent representatives scrambling to associate themselves with her exoneration. The ACLU issued a statement. Local politicians suddenly wanted to meet with her to discuss criminal justice reform. Amara wanted none of it. She just wanted to go home. But first, she needed to see Lily. Richard Harrington waited outside the courtroom with his daughter. When he saw Amara, his face crumpled with remorse. Miss Jenkins, I don't know how to begin apologizing for what I put you through. I believed Victoria. I let her manipulate me into betraying someone who had shown nothing but kindness to my daughter. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. Amara looked at the billionaire who had once been willing to see her imprisoned, and she saw a man who had been deceived as surely as she had been targeted. But her anger was still raw, still burning. You have money and power and every advantage in the world, and you chose to believe her over me without even questioning it. Do you know why? Because in your world, people who look like me are always guilty until proven innocent. You didn't even give me a chance. Richard absorbed the blow, nodding. You're right. You're absolutely right. And I have no excuse except my own blindness and prejudice. I'm sorry, Miss Jenkins. I know those words aren't enough, but they're all I have right now. Lily stepped forward, looking up at Amara with enormous eyes. Are you mad at me too? For not speaking sooner. Amara knelt down so she was eye level with the child. This brave little girl who had found her voice at the exact moment Amara was about to lose everything. Oh, sweetheart. No, you were so scared, and you had every right to be. What you did today, speaking up when it mattered most, that took more courage than anything I've ever seen. You saved me, Lily. You saved my life. Lily threw her arms around Amara's neck, and they held each other while the adults looked on. When they finally separated, Amara asked the question that had been burning in her mind. The notebook that Elena mentioned, the drawings you made, where are they? Lily looked at her father, then back at Amara. I hid them in my room. Miss Victoria took my first notebook, the one Elena saw, but I had made copies. I hid them inside my mattress, and I took pictures with my tablet too, just in case. I've been building a case for months, just like the detectives on TV. I knew the truth would matter someday. The detectives assigned to what was now being called the Harrington case retrieved everything from Lily's room. They found a cardboard box hidden in the box spring containing dozens of drawings, printed photographs, and even handwritten notes in Lily's careful script describing what she had witnessed. There were pages torn from Victoria's personal journal that Lily had rescued from the trash, documenting the woman's racist views toward the household staff. Victoria had written about needing to eliminate the black maid who Richard trusted too much, about how these people always have their hands out. And worse, the language was vile, exposing the deep racism that had motivated Victoria's targeting of Amara. But Lily's hidden archive contained something even more damning. Recordings. The child had used her tablet to record conversations between Victoria and Richard, capturing moments when Victoria made racist comments disguised as jokes. More critically, she had recorded Victoria's threats after Catherine's death. On one audio file, clear as a bell, Victoria's voice could be heard telling 5-year-old Lily, "If you ever tell anyone what you saw, I'll make sure your daddy has an accident too." Bad things happen to people who don't keep secrets. The district attorney's office moved swiftly. Within 24 hours, Victoria Ashford, whose real name was Bethany Wallace, was charged with first-degree murder in the death of Catherine Harrington, conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, witness intimidation, hate crimes for racial bias, and a dozen other counts. Her bail was denied. She would await trial in the same county jail where Amara had suffered. Detectives began unraveling Victoria's history, and what they found was chilling. She was a serial con artist who had been targeting wealthy men for over a decade. They traced her back through 6 different identities across 8 states. The pattern was consistent. She would insinuate herself into the life of a wealthy widower or divorcee, eliminate any staff members who might threaten her control, and either drain the man's accounts or, in 2 previous cases, arrange fatal accidents after securing her position as beneficiary. The families Victoria had worked for before the Harringtons were contacted again, this time by law enforcement rather than Jasmine's inquiries. Faced with a murder investigation, the non-disclosure agreement suddenly seemed less important. The Aldridges admitted that their black butler, Marcus Chen, had been accused of theft shortly before Victoria disappeared. They had never pressed charges because they couldn't actually prove anything was missing. They just had Victoria's word. When detectives showed them the evidence from Amara's case, they realized Marcus had likely been framed too. The Reynoldses revealed that their Latina nanny, Sofia Martinez, had been accused of child abuse. The accusations came entirely from Victoria, and they had resulted in Sofia losing her childcare license and her career. She was now working as a hotel maid, unable to find work in her field. Both families agreed to make statements, and both wanted to make restitution to the people Victoria had destroyed. Detective Sarah Morrison, who was leading the investigation, held a press conference that became national news. What we have uncovered is not just a series of individual crimes but a pattern of predatory behavior that specifically targeted vulnerable people, particularly women of color in domestic service positions. Victoria Ashford, also known as Bethany Wallace, weaponized racial bias within our justice system to destroy innocent people while she pursued her criminal agenda. This case should prompt serious reflection on how quickly we believe accusations when they conform to our pre-existing prejudices. The story exploded across media. News vans lined up outside the courthouse. Reporters wanted to interview Amara, to hear her story, to make her the face of wrongful accusations and systemic racism. But Amara just wanted to disappear, to try to put her shattered life back together. She went to stay with Jasmine, sleeping on her friend's couch while trying to process the trauma of the past month. She had nightmares about being back in jail, about judges and lawyers, and the cold face of Victoria. She woke up in cold sweats, feeling the ghost of handcuffs on her wrists. Her mother flew up from Atlanta, jobless but determined to be with her daughter. Dante came too, taking time off from his engineering classes to provide support. The family that Victoria had tried to destroy gathered together in Jasmine's small apartment, holding each other and trying to heal. Richard Harrington called repeatedly, leaving messages asking what he could do to help. His lawyers drew up settlement agreements offering Amara $7 million in compensation for her wrongful arrest and imprisonment. The money would solve her financial problems forever, could pay for her education, buy her mother a house, secure Dante's future. But accepting it felt like putting a price on her trauma, and Amara struggled with the decision. "Take the money," her mother finally said. "Baby, I know your pride hurts. I know you want to tell Richard Harrington where he can put his guilt money. But this is about more than pride. This is about making sure that what happened to you means something. Take that money and use it to help other people who are going through what you went through. Turn your pain into power." So Amara accepted the settlement, but she also made Richard agree to funding an endowment for legal defense of wrongfully accused domestic workers. The Amara Jenkins Justice Fund would provide resources for people who couldn't afford adequate representation, particularly women of color facing accusations in wealthy households. James Mitchell was hired as the fund's legal director, finally able to give his clients the time and attention they deserved. Jasmine became the fund's investigator. Elena Rodriguez was rehired by Richard with a substantial raise and benefits, and she agreed to serve on the fund's advisory board. Meanwhile, Victoria's trial was scheduled for 3 months away. The prosecution was building an overwhelming case, with Lily's testimony at the center. Child psychologists confirmed that Lily was credible, that her memories were consistent and detailed, that she had every reason to be truthful. The recordings she had made would be admissible as evidence. But the defense attorneys Victoria hired, expensive white shoe lawyers from New York, began crafting a strategy. They argued that Lily was an unreliable witness, traumatized and possibly coached. They claimed the recordings had been doctored. They filed motions to suppress evidence and delay the trial. Most disturbingly, They began making the case that Victoria herself was a victim, a woman with mental health issues who needed treatment rather than punishment. The narrative was familiar to anyone who had watched white women escape consequences for their actions. Suddenly, Victoria was fragile, troubled, someone to be pitied rather than condemned. The racist journal entries, evidence of illness, not intent. The threats against a child, proof she wasn't in her right mind. The murder of Catherine Harrington, a tragic result of untreated mental disturbance. Amara watched this unfold with growing fury. The same system that had been ready to imprison her for decades was now bending over backward to humanize the woman who had orchestrated it all. Articles appeared in sympathetic magazines about Victoria's difficult childhood, her struggles with mental health, the complex factors that led to her crimes. Nobody had written sympathetic pieces about Amara when she was in jail. Nobody had explored the complex factors of being a black woman in a racist society, of working 2 jobs to survive, of being immediately assumed guilty. One morning, Amara woke to find protesters outside Jasmine's apartment building. They were a small group, maybe 15 people, but they carried signs supporting Victoria and condemning Amara. Liar, one sign read. Manipulating a traumatized child for money, said another. They had bought completely into the defense narrative, these mostly white women who saw themselves in Victoria and couldn't stomach the idea that someone who looked like them could be so evil. Amara called Detective Morrison, who sent officers to disperse the crowd, but the damage was done. She no longer felt safe. Richard Harrington, watching all of this from his own hell of guilt and realization, made a decision. He sold the Greenwich estate. Unable to live in the house where his wife had been murdered and where Amara had been framed, he bought a modest home in Stamford, deliberately choosing a more diverse neighborhood. He enrolled Lily in public school instead of the elite private academy she had attended. He was trying, in his imperfect way, to understand the world from a different perspective. He also used his connections to ensure Victoria's defense team faced maximum scrutiny. When they tried to exclude black jurors from the panel, Richard's lawyers filed friend of the court briefs, highlighting the racial bias. When defense attorneys made statements to the press that contained dog whistle racism, Richard held press conferences calling them out. It wasn't nearly enough to undo the harm he had caused, but it was something. 2 months after Amara's exoneration, she testified before a congressional committee on criminal justice reform. She sat in the witness chair, facing rows of senators and representatives, and told her story with unflinching honesty. She described the racism she had experienced, the way evidence had been manufactured, the system's willingness to believe the worst about her. She talked about the other women in jail with her, the cycle of poverty and prosecution that trapped so many black women in particular. I was one of the lucky ones, she said, her voice steady. I had a miracle. A child found her voice at exactly the right moment. But for every story like mine, there are thousands that never get told. There are women right now sitting in jail cells because the system believed lies about them. There are women who took plea deals because they couldn't afford to fight, who carry felony convictions for crimes they didn't commit. I'm here to speak for them because I could have so easily been one of them. The testimony went viral. Amara became a reluctant symbol of a broken system. Organizations fighting for criminal justice reform wanted her at their events. Universities invited her to speak. Publishers offered book deals. It was overwhelming and exhausting. But Amara recognized the platform she had been given. She could use it, or she could let it use her. She chose to use it, even though every speech, every interview, every appearance meant reliving her trauma in public. Victoria's trial began on a cold morning in November, 6 months after Amara's nightmare had begun. The courthouse was surrounded by media trucks and protesters on both sides, those supporting Victoria and far more supporting Amara. Security was intense, with metal detectors and police presence everywhere. Amara sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Jasmine and her mother. Richard Harrington sat across the aisle with Lily beside him. The child had been deemed competent to testify, despite the defense's strenuous objections. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Marcus Chen, a no-nonsense Korean-American attorney who had built his career on convictions in difficult cases. He had prepared meticulously, and his opening statement laid out the case with devastating clarity. "This is a story about a predator," he began, looking directly at the jury. "Not the kind you see in movies, but the kind that walks among us wearing a beautiful mask. Victoria Ashford is a serial criminal who has spent over a decade destroying lives to enrich herself. She murdered Catherine Harrington to gain access to a wealthy widower. She terrorized an 8-year-old child into silence. And when she perceived a threat from a young black woman who had done nothing but her job with kindness and dedication, she framed that woman using the most insidious tool available: racial bias." He walked the jury through the evidence: the altered security footage, the paid witnesses, the fake text messages, the journal entries filled with racist hatred. He showed them Lily's drawings, explained how a traumatized child had been documenting crimes for months because she knew the adults around her wouldn't believe her. He played the recording of Victoria threatening Lily, and several jurors visibly reacted to the cold calculation in her voice. The defense attorney, Margaret Blackstone, was a legendary criminal lawyer from Manhattan who had successfully defended CEOs and celebrities accused of far worse. She stood to give her opening statement with the confidence of someone who had never lost a major case. "You're going to hear a lot of emotion in this trial," she said calmly. "You're going to hear tragic stories and see dramatic evidence. But I ask you to look past the emotions and see the reality. A deeply troubled woman who suffers from complex mental health issues, who made terrible decisions under the influence of those untreated conditions. Victoria Ashford is not the monster the prosecution wants you to see. She's a sick woman who needs help, not punishment." It was a gamble, essentially admitting Victoria had done terrible things while arguing she shouldn't be held responsible. Amara felt rage building in her chest. The excuse of mental illness, so readily denied to people of color, was being deployed to shield a white woman from consequences. The first week of trial focused on Catherine Harrington's death. Accident investigators testified about the tampered brake lines. Mechanics explained how the sabotage had been done. Cell phone records placed Victoria in the area under one of her aliases. Richard testified about meeting Victoria at a charity event 6 months after his wife's death, about how she had seemed to understand his grief perfectly, because she had caused it. She had studied him, known exactly how to present herself as the solution to his loneliness. The second week brought testimony about Victoria's pattern of targeting wealthy men. Previous victims testified. Men who had lost money or property, who had been emotionally manipulated and financially exploited. The Aldridges and the Reynoldses testified about their employees who had been framed and fired. Marcus Chen, the butler, appeared in his best suit and described how Victoria's accusations had destroyed his reputation. Sophia Martinez, the nanny who lost her career, testified through tears about the years of struggling to rebuild her life. Then came the evidence about Amara's case. James Mitchell testified about the manufactured evidence, the impossible bail, the way the system had been weaponized against his client. Elena Rodriguez described being fired for discovering Lily's drawings. The pawnshop owner and jeweler confessed to accepting bribes from Victoria to create false evidence. Each piece of testimony built a picture of calculated evil. But the defense had a strategy. Margaret Blackstone called expert witnesses, psychiatrists who diagnosed Victoria with borderline personality disorder, with attachment issues stemming from childhood trauma, with dissociative episodes that made her not fully responsible for her actions. These experts were expensive and persuasive, packaging Victoria's crimes as symptoms rather than choices. Amara watched jurors' faces and saw some of them softening. The defense was working. Then Lily Harrington took the stand. The courtroom fell completely silent as the small girl walked to the witness box. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair in neat braids, and she carried a worn, stuffed rabbit for comfort. The judge had allowed the rabbit over defense objections, and Lily clutched it as she was sworn in. Marcus Chen approached her gently. "Lily, do you know why we're all here today?" "Yes," Lily said, her voice small but clear. "We're here because Miss Victoria did bad things, and she needs to be held accountable. Can you tell the jury what you saw the day Miss Amara was accused of stealing the necklace?" Lily took a breath and began. She described hiding in the window seat, watching Victoria plant the necklace in Amara's bag, seeing the cruel satisfaction on the woman's face. Her testimony was detailed and unwavering, delivered with the straightforward honesty that only children possess. Chen asked. "Why didn't you speak up right away?" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Because Miss Victoria told me what would happen if I talked. After my mommy died, Miss Victoria came to see me. She said if I ever told anyone what I remembered about the car, she would hurt my daddy too. She said accidents could happen to anyone. I was 5 years old, and I was so scared. So I stopped talking, because if I didn't talk at all, I couldn't accidentally say something that would make her hurt my daddy." "What changed?" Chen asked gently. "Why did you decide to speak at the plea hearing?" Lily looked directly at Amara. "Because Miss Amara was always kind to me. She never forced me to talk or made me feel bad for being quiet. She just sat with me and read me stories and made me feel safe. When I saw that she was going to go to prison for something she didn't do, I realized that being scared wasn't a good enough reason to let an innocent person suffer. My mommy used to tell me that courage isn't about not being scared, it's about doing the right thing even when you're terrified. So, I found my courage." Several jurors wiped their eyes. Margaret Blackstone stood for cross-examination, and Amara held her breath. Blackstone was known for being ruthless, but surely she wouldn't go after a child. "Lily, you love Miss Jenkins very much, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you were very upset when she was arrested." "Yes, ma'am." "Isn't it possible that you've mixed up what you saw? That maybe you saw Miss Jenkins near the jewelry box, and your mind created a story where Miss Ashford was the bad person?" Lily shook her head firmly. "No, Mom. I know what I saw. I drew pictures of it so I wouldn't forget. I took recordings so people would believe me. I've been building evidence for months because I knew adults wouldn't want to believe that a grown-up lady could be so mean." Blackstone tried several more approaches, but Lily remained consistent. The child had clearly been telling the truth from the beginning. When Lily stepped down from the witness stand, she walked directly to Amara and climbed into her lap. The judge allowed it, recognizing the bond between them. As the trial continued, Victoria's lawyers called their client to testify. It was a risky move, but they were trying to humanize her, to show the jury a troubled woman rather than a calculating criminal. Victoria took the stand wearing a modest gray dress, her hair pulled back simply, her makeup minimal. She had been coached to appear vulnerable and broken. Under her lawyer's questioning, she spoke about a difficult childhood, about abuse and abandonment, about making terrible mistakes because she never learned how to form healthy attachments. She cried at appropriate moments, her voice breaking with what seemed like genuine remorse. But then Marcus Chen stood for cross-examination, and everything changed. He walked her through each crime methodically, asking her to explain her actions. Each time she tried to claim confusion or mental illness, he confronted her with evidence of deliberate planning. "You wrote in your journal, and I quote, 'Need to eliminate the black maid. She has too much influence over Richard and the brat,'" Chen read. "Does that sound like someone confused or someone calculating?" Victoria's composure cracked. "I was having a dissociative episode. A dissociative episode where you carefully documented your racist views and detailed your plans? Where you researched pawn shops and created fake receipts? Where you systematically paid off witnesses?" Chen pushed harder. "Let's talk about Catherine Harrington. You tampered with her brake lines on a curve you had identified as particularly dangerous. You watched the news coverage of the crash, and then you approached her grieving husband at a charity event 6 months later with a story about being a widow yourself. A lie designed to create connection. Does any of that sound like mental illness to you?" "I don't remember," Victoria shouted, her facade finally shattering. "I was sick. I needed help." "What you needed," Chen said coldly, "was Richard Harrington's money. Everything you did was in service of that goal. You murdered his wife. You terrorized his daughter. You tried to destroy an innocent woman whose only crime was being good at her job and caring about a little girl who needed love. And you did it all with full knowledge and intent, using racism as your weapon because you knew the system would believe a white woman over a black woman." Victoria's face twisted with rage. That maid had no right to have such influence in that house. She was the help. She needed to know her place. The courtroom gasped. Victoria's lawyer tried to stop her, but she kept going. "I worked too hard to have everything ruined by some nobody who thought she could insert herself into a family that wasn't hers. Richard was mine. That fortune was mine, and I would have had it all if that brat had just kept her mouth shut like I told her to." It was a complete confession, delivered in fury, exposing the racism and greed that motivated every crime. The jury had seen behind the mask, and there was no coming back from it. Chen sat down, satisfied. No further questions. The defense rested shortly after, unable to recover from Victoria's outburst. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following week. But that night, something else happened that changed everything. Detectives working the case received an anonymous tip pointing them to a storage unit in New Jersey, rented under one of Victoria's aliases. Inside, they found evidence of 4 additional victims, 3 more women of color who had worked in wealthy households where Victoria had been employed, all of whom had been framed for various crimes and either served time or taken plea deals. And most shockingly, evidence suggesting Victoria had caused the death of a previous employer, an elderly man whose death had been ruled a heart attack, but whose medications Victoria had been systematically poisoning. Marcus Chen filed additional charges. Victoria wasn't just a con artist and murderer. She was a serial predator who had been destroying lives for over 15 years. 6 months after Victoria's trial began, the jury returned after only 4 hours of deliberation. It was one of the fastest verdicts in Connecticut criminal court history for such a complex case. The 4 women stood and read the verdict on each count. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 47 separate counts of crimes ranging from first-degree murder to conspiracy to hate crimes. The courtroom erupted in applause, despite the judge calling for order. Amara sat between her mother and Jasmine, tears streaming down her face, not quite able to believe it was finally over. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Morrison, who had presided over the trial, looked at Victoria with an expression of profound disgust. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered a defendant who showed such calculated cruelty, such complete disregard for human life and dignity. You weaponized racial bias. You terrorized a child. You destroyed innocent lives without remorse. The only mercy you showed was to yourself." She sentenced Victoria to life in prison without possibility of parole for the murder of Catherine Harrington. She added 45 years for the other charges, to be served consecutively if Victoria ever successfully appealed the murder conviction. "You will die in prison, Miss Wallace," Judge Morrison said, using Victoria's real name, "and perhaps in the years ahead, you will develop the capacity for genuine remorse. But whether you do or not, you will never hurt anyone again." Victoria was led away, screaming, still proclaiming her innocence, still blaming everyone but herself. Amara watched her go and felt nothing but exhaustion. There was no joy in this, just relief that it was finished. In the year that followed, Amara worked to rebuild her life and help others do the same. The Amara Jenkins Justice Fund grew rapidly, supported not just by Richard Harrington's endowment but by donations from people across the country who had been moved by her story. They provided legal representation for domestic workers facing false accusations, investigated suspicious cases, and successfully exonerated 3 women in the first year alone. One of those women was Sophia Martinez, the nanny Victoria had destroyed in Philadelphia. James Mitchell and Jasmine investigated her case and discovered that the evidence against her had been completely fabricated. Sophia's child care license was restored, and she received a substantial settlement from the family that had fired her. She now worked as a consultant for the Justice Fund, helping them identify potential cases of racial bias in accusations against domestic workers. Marcus Chen, the butler from Boston, also received justice. The Aldridges publicly apologized and provided him with a letter of recommendation that helped him secure a position at a prestigious hotel. He too joined the Justice Fund's advisory board. Elena Rodriguez continued working for Richard Harrington, but now as his chief of staff, rather than a housekeeper, managing his growing charitable foundation. The 3 women Victoria had framed, according to the evidence found in the storage unit, were tracked down and contacted. 2 of them had served time in prison on false charges. One was still incarcerated when the Justice Fund discovered her case. All 3 received full exonerations, settlements, and support services to help them rebuild their shattered lives. Amara used her platform to advocate for criminal justice reform at the state and federal level. She testified before legislatures, wrote op-eds, and gave speeches about the intersection of race, class, and justice. She enrolled in law school, determined to fight the system from the inside. Her mother, after receiving settlement money from the hospital that had fired her, started a non-profit in Atlanta supporting families of wrongly convicted individuals. Dante, her brother, stayed in college and continued his engineering studies. He spent his summers interning at the Justice Fund, using his technical skills to help investigate cases involving digital evidence. Richard Harrington became an unlikely ally in the fight for reform. He used his wealth and influence to fund initiatives supporting domestic workers' rights, better oversight of household employment practices, and criminal justice reform. He established a foundation in Catherine's name, dedicated to supporting children who had lost parents to violence. And he continued therapy with Lily, both of them working through the trauma Victoria had inflicted. Lily thrived with her voice restored. She became an outspoken advocate for children's rights, giving age-appropriate talks at schools about the importance of speaking truth even when scared. She maintained a close relationship with Amara, visiting regularly, and she testified before Congress at age 9 about the impact of domestic violence and psychological abuse on children. The two of them, the black woman who had been framed and the white child who found her voice, became symbols of what justice could look like when people chose courage over complicity. On the one-year anniversary of Amara's exoneration, a ceremony was held at Bethel AME Church in Stamford. The sanctuary was packed with community members, activists, journalists, and supporters. Reverend Thompson stood at the pulpit and called Amara forward. "This woman stood in the shadow of injustice and emerged into the light of truth," he declared. "But she didn't emerge alone. She brought others with her, and she continues to reach back into that darkness to pull more people toward freedom." Today, we honor not just her survival but her transformation of pain into power. Amara accepted a Community Leadership Award, but she used her speech to redirect attention. "I'm not a hero," she said, her voice carrying through the sanctuary. "I'm someone who got lucky that a brave little girl found her voice. Lucky that I had people who believed in me and fought for me. Lucky that the truth came out before it was too late. But luck shouldn't be required for justice." Today, right now, there are women sitting in jail cells for crimes they didn't commit. There are people taking plea deals because they can't afford to fight. There are families being destroyed by a system that sees black and brown people as guilty until proven innocent, if we're ever proven innocent at all. She paused, looking out at the faces before her. "So yes, celebrate this victory. Celebrate that Victoria is in prison and I'm free. But then get back to work, because there are so many more Amaras out there who need us. So many more Lilies who need to find their voices. Justice for one is not justice at all if it doesn't lead to justice for many." The crowd rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. As people filed out afterward, many stopped to talk with Amara, to share their own stories of injustice, to ask how they could help. The work was overwhelming and endless, but Amara had learned something important through her ordeal. She wasn't alone. Community and solidarity could move mountains. That evening, Amara sat with Jasmine, her mother, and Dante in her new apartment, finally a place of her own that she could afford thanks to the settlement. They ordered pizza and laughed and talked about the future. Amara had enrolled at Yale Law School and would start in the fall. Dante was planning to study abroad for a semester. Her mother was thinking about writing a book about their family's experience. "Can I ask you something?" Dante said during a quiet moment. "When you were in jail and everything looked hopeless, what kept you going?" Amara thought about those dark days in the cell, the weight of false accusations, the terror of watching her future disappear. Honestly, it was thinking about all the women who had been through the same thing and didn't get a miracle. "I kept thinking that if I survived this, I had to make it mean something. Their stories needed to be told. Their injustices needed to be addressed. So I held on to that, even when I was ready to give up. The idea that my suffering could be transformed into something that might prevent someone else's suffering." She looked at her family, these people who had stood by her through the worst time of her life. "And I thought about you. All of you. I couldn't let Victoria destroy our family. I couldn't let the system break us. We've been through too much, fought too hard, to let them win." Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Elena Rodriguez. "The Justice Fund just received a call from a woman in California whose daughter is in prison for allegedly stealing from her employer. The story sounds familiar. Want to take the case?" Amara looked at the message, then at her family. She thought about Victoria, rotting in prison where she belonged. She thought about Lily, growing up brave and outspoken. She thought about all the women waiting in jail cells across America, hoping someone would believe them, hoping someone would fight for them. She typed back, "Absolutely, send me everything," because the work was never finished. Every day, somewhere in America, another black woman, another immigrant woman, another poor woman was being accused, was being disbelieved, was being processed through a system designed to grind them down. But now there was a network of people ready to fight back. People who understood that racial justice wasn't just about laws and policies. It was about believing black women when they said they were innocent. It was about questioning narratives that confirmed racist stereotypes. It was about recognizing that the most dangerous criminals sometimes wore designer clothes and spoke with expensive educations and looked exactly like the people society had been trained to trust. Have you ever witnessed someone being unfairly accused because of their race or background? What would you do if you saw injustice happening, but speaking up felt risky? Share your thoughts in the comments below because these conversations matter, and your voice could make a difference for someone who needs support. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to help spread awareness about racial bias in our justice system. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful true stories that shed light on important social issues we all need to understand better. And share this video with someone who needs to hear about courage in the face of injustice, because Amara's story and Lily's bravery remind us that speaking truth to power is how we create change together. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this story. May we all find the courage to stand up for justice when it matters most. And may we never stop believing that the truth, though it may be delayed, will ultimately prevail when good people refuse to stay silent. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting for what's right.